What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So in life, three things are for certain: death, taxes, and the inevitable and incredibly steep depreciation of Samsung smartphones. Let me start out by saying that that's not a jab at Samsung. There's nothing wrong with their products that causes this, and they can't do anything about it. It sucks for them, but it's a fantastic opportunity for the rest of us. If you're okay with not getting the latest and greatest device as soon as it comes out, you can get a flagship phone that's a year or two old for a huge discount. I've covered this on the channel before, but I think the best example of this right now is the Samsung Galaxy S10. When this phone launched in March 2019, just over 2 years ago now, it retailed for some $899. It was a flagship phone at a flagship price, and at the time, there was really nothing wrong with that. Now, that same phone can be bought for, get this, $228 on Amazon. It's absolutely crazy. And yes, it's a listing for a renewed device. It's Amazon's sort of second-hand pre-owned program, but it's the exact same phone with the same flagship specs, the same flagship capabilities, all for 75% off. Now, I think buying any smartphone for a little over $200 is pretty good nowadays, but with the S10 in particular, you might actually be getting a better phone at this crazy low price than some brand new 2021 devices that retail for $400 or $500 or even $600. So let me explain. First off, physically, the S10 offers that original premium flagship build. Glass on both the front and rear, polished metal sides all around, curves and contours throughout that make the phone feel slim and sleek in the hand, and a flowing edge-to-edge screen that's sort of a love it or hate it setup now, but I think this was like peak Samsung smartphone. There's no compromises, no sacrifices. Sure, it'll shatter to pieces when you drop it, unlike the more durable Gorilla Glass front and plastic rear of today's Samsung flagships, but this phone is still IP68 water and dust resistant at least, and I think for the most part, this is still what people think of when they envision a flagship caliber device. Design-wise, there's also nothing particularly dated here. It's only 2 years old after all, but smartphones haven't changed much even in like the last 5 years, I feel like. So I don't think anyone can look at this device and say definitively that a 2021 smartphone looks any better. Looks aren't everything though. You still need to use this phone. It has to have some worthwhile features. You still need it to handle day-to-day tasks and maybe even a little more than that. And fortunately, this phone is jam-packed with everything and then some, from its internal specs to the rest of the physical features and capabilities that nowadays tend to get taken away from certain phones. For example, the S10 has a headphone jack. It's the last flagship from Samsung to include one. You also have an SD card slot for additional storage. Again, not something really offered anymore nowadays. There's stereo speakers, an in-display fingerprint reader that's still faster than some phones, Samsung-specific add-ons like reverse wireless charging, DeX support. The S10 even has a heart rate sensor on the back in the camera module. Half this stuff you can't even find on some smartphones released this year, and sure, not all of it may be useful or even valuable to you, but the point is that the S10 was probably the last flagship phone from Samsung to truly offer no compromises. And nowadays, some of these features might even be a selling point of sorts when you start to compare. Now, all of this stuff is great, but the most important thing to consider is how this phone performs now 2 years later. And not only does it perform quite well, with the latest Android 11 and One UI 3.1 software updates, this phone is on par with its 2021 counterparts. In fact, since Samsung has pledged 3 full years of update support, you can expect Android 12 at least to hit this phone, which is great. And that additional update means this phone is arguably a decent investment for another year or two. Overall, the day-to-day software experience for me has been great, even with a ton of apps installed on this thing now. Very rarely have I experienced it getting tripped up, and that's because this phone still has a flagship Snapdragon 800 series processor powering it, the Snapdragon 855, along with 8 gigs of RAM. And obviously, those specs are miles ahead of any other $200 to $300 phone on the market, but arguably better than even the latest Snapdragon 700 series chipset inside the likes of the A52 and A72, which currently cost twice as much as this phone. And in fact, comparatively, if you put this S10 side by side against the latest S21, while there may be a fraction of a second difference in launch and load times with apps in favor of the new flagship, the price you'd pay for that new flagship phone, still $800 right now, is tough to swallow when you consider the fact that not under any circumstances will it yield you 3 to 4 times the speed or capabilities when you're paying 3 to 4 times as much. In my opinion, the main reason for that is simply the fact that while smartphones are still getting quicker and more powerful, we're experiencing some decent diminishing marginal returns now. 4 or 5 years ago, there was a noticeable difference year over year with a new smartphone. Today, the difference just isn't so noticeable, and that makes it super tough to justify spending so much more money on a new phone. Because of all that, I think the value you get here in a phone like this, the S10, at a price like this, well under $300, is just so much better than most any new phone you'd be getting at a much higher price. Something else the S10 still has over the competition, a better viewing experience. And this is measurable in more ways than one. The S10's 6.1-inch display is a 1440p panel. It offers a full 3040 by 1440 resolution, crams in some 550 pixels per inch. It's AMOLED with HDR10 Plus support, and collectively it offers better specs than a vast majority of today's smartphones. It's not only bold and bright, but it's also sharper than what Samsung delivers on its newest phones. And I know some people still miss having the over-the-top resolution more than anything else. Now, it would be unfair of me to ignore the kinds of things people do want in a smartphone nowadays, mainly a high refresh rate 90 or 120 hertz display. You don't get that here, unfortunately, while some mid-range phones nowadays do offer that. But if you aren't so concerned with 90 or 120 hertz, what you do still wind up with in this phone is an incredible flagship display that is technically sharper than even some $1,000 phones in 2021, all for a fraction of the price. And this once again is a prime example of the S10 coming from an era where not only were there no compromises, but the phone really pushed the limits on what it offered. Finally, I think we also have to talk about all those cameras around back. And when this phone first came out, there were certainly some jokes about having a camera module stretch basically across the whole back of the phone. But this bump is minuscule compared to some camera bumps of today. What it offers though is a setup that I think is just as good as anything you can find right now. You get a 12 megapixel main lens, 12 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. Collectively, all the most useful and capable kinds of lenses. There's no gimmicky macro lens, no unnecessary depth sensor, and capability wise, there's nothing here that the phone lacks or can't do that any 2021 device could. In fact, I'd even argue that the results coming from this phone still look really phenomenal. I think you'll find this phone still comes from an era where Samsung used bright, saturated colors more than most anything else, but detail-wise, it's all here. And while Samsung continues to push the crazy over-the-top camera features like 8K video recording and super zoom, the core functions and features here on the S10 are more than enough for every occasion, and the results, I think, speak for themselves. So if it wasn't already obvious, I think the Samsung Galaxy S10 is an incredible value in 2021. I do realize that the cheapest Amazon renewed listing that has this priced at $228 is a very extreme example, but the bottom line is this. For a fraction of what it costs just 2 years ago, you're getting a flagship caliber phone, arguably with more features, more add-ons, and more capabilities than devices released this year. And those phones cost way more than this one does. The S10 is the perfect buy right now. And even if you can't snag it at that super cheap price, I'd still consider a must-have at $300 or $350 or even $400. Seriously, it's probably the best deal on the market right now for a smartphone. It's a truly incredible value, and I can't recommend it enough if you are in the market for a new device. So there you go. Those are all of my thoughts on the Samsung Galaxy S10 in 2021. What do you guys think? Is this phone really that worth it right now? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.